QQ. If a person had Parkinson's, how long would it take to have a little indication that, you had hope?
It may be 2 or 3 months.
2 or 3 months, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, go.
Good morning. We're glad you're here again to hear Dr. Fletches, and we're thankful that he is still here with us, and he's going to be speaking on iodine today, the use of it and the importance of it in our bodies. And I would like to start with a word of prayer, please. Can we bow our heads, please? Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your love and care for us. We thank you how wonderfully we are made. And Dr. Fletches is helping us to understand the importance of how you have made us and all the different elements you have put in our bodies. And I ask us now that we might have hearing ears to hear, eyes to see, and understanding and wisdom from you. We ask your Holy Spirit to be with us now. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Some of you may be new to what we're doing here. I'm basically a family practice doctor. I graduated from Southern back in 1973. I was one of the physics majors here at the college. I went on to Loma Linda to get my medical degree. And while I was at Loma Linda, I got my master's in public health as well as my MD degree. I went on to do a family practice residency at Florida Hospital in Orlando. So I'm pretty much a graduate of the educational program that this church has put together. And so, and one of the things that Dr. Hefferlin, who was the chairman of the of the physics department here at Southern, taught me, was he tried to get me to always think outside the box. So he said, if you stay inside the box, you're not going to go too far. He said, you need to learn to try to think outside the box. One of my professors was Dr. Henry Coleman, and Dr. Coleman was the same way. So he lived his life outside the box. So, so we basically had to learn how to do these things, and we moved on to do the type of work that we've done and so on. When I got into residency, I basically had to learn about the different diseases and the medications that we use for these diseases and so on. And one of the problems that I ran into quite frequently was PMS, premenstrual syndrome, problem of increased agitation that happens in teenage girls just before their menstrual cycles. And when I asked one of my family practice mentors, how do we treat PMS? He said, PMS, that's a Valium deficiency in women. He said, just give them Valium and they'll be happy. So it forced me to rethink this whole concept of that. And while I was at medical school, I had a professor from UCLA that came over and gave a lecture at the psychiatry department about the use of a vitamin mineral mixture for treatment of PMS. And he basically had found out that almost 95% of all the women that were in the prison system of California, that 95% of them had committed the crime that they were put in prison for because of something they had done within 5 days of their menstrual cycle. So PMS, very serious medical problem as far as pathology of the brain and how the brain thinks and the things that happen with hormones. And so we were basically forced into, and this doctor, by balancing out the trace minerals and the vitamins, was able to get, he was a GYN endocrinologist, and he basically taught me that the ovaries are very sensitive to fluctuations in the minerals, trace minerals and vitamins that the body needs. in order to have normal ovarian function. So he basically taught me that we need to pay attention to the trace minerals. And later on, he and I collaborated together, put together some studies. You'll find our papers on the internet. The one that you have here in your hands is one that we put together on the use of iodine in a medical practice. He basically came to me in about the mid-1990s, and he sat there and said, is there anything else we need to look at trace mineral-wise? And I said, well, there's an interesting paper that just showed up on the in the Journal for the American Medical Association. It was looking at trace minerals and what diseases are associated with trace mineral problems. And one of them was a problem known as fibrocystic breast disease. It's a problem of very tender breasts just before the menstrual cycle. And he thought that was, and the article mentioned that it was due to an iodine deficiency. And so he kind of sat there and said, with his inquisitive mind, he sat there and said, well, what else are we missing with this? Because he said from an endocrinology standpoint, iodine is used by the body to make thyroid hormone, period, end of discussion. And I said, according to this, it looks like the breast is very sensitive to the need for iodine and to keep it healthy. And so at that point, he and I started looking through the medical research literature, and we found all sorts of articles on these topics, and that's some of the work that you've got in your hands right now. He basically put together a whole plethora of articles that he picked up from the medical library at UCLA, and then we put these together into practical use. We learned how to measure iodine in the body, how to figure out if somebody's missing it or if somebody needs it, and so on. Now, he was the man who helped to, there's a hormone out there called DHEA. Have any of you ever heard of it? Okay. And what do you know about DHEA? Okay. DHEA is it goes up, starts going up at age 7. It's the hormone that helps you to have body hair. So DHEA controls the making of hair on the arms, the legs, pubic area, etc. And then it also controls the oil production on the skin. So now DHEA in women peaks at about age 32. In men it peaks at about age 25. And then from that point on, DHEA is dropping. And so DHEA controls the thickness of your skin. You'll notice that your skin is getting thinner as you're getting older. And the thin skin is due to lack of DHEA. You'll notice that you don't shave your legs anymore. You don't shave your underarms anymore because there's no hair growth. The hair on the pubic area is disappearing. You're starting to look like a 10-year-old girl with no hair, and so on. So that this is all due to DHEA deficiency. And DHEA also controls the thickness of the skin, and it helps to control warmth. Lack of DHEA, you have problems with being cold a lot, okay? And I personally have been taking DHEA since I was about age 45, 46, right in there. And as a result, DHEA will freeze you in time. So basically, I look today, even though I'm 65 years old, my body, physical body, looks like the body of a 50-year-old. And so basically, I'm frozen in time, and I'm basically my physical body is looking like that of someone in their early 50s. My two brothers, they're much younger than I. Both of them have already lost 3/4 of the hair on top of their head, and they're fully white. This is natural hair, and it's real, and it's, and the color is the same color, so that you can see that, there is a big difference here with DHEA. DHEA also is sold over the counter. You don't need a prescription for it. So they'd probably sell it here at the Village Market. And you need about, for those of you above age 50, you need 50 milligrams a day. Below age 50, you need about 25 milligrams a day. But winter's coming, and DHEA will warm you up. So it'll make you much warmer so you're not as cold throughout the winter months, okay? If you're not reminded by winter, just step outside and look again. So it's coming. But DHEA will help warm you up so that you won't be as cold through the winter months, okay? Now, in respect to iodine, we looked with Dr. Abraham at what is it that iodine does in the body. And so we had to go back and look at history. And what we found is that iodine was discovered during the time of Napoleon. In about 1811, it was the iodine was used for the treatment of goiters. And that was the first time that a single iodine was used for a single disease, a specific disease, and that's goiter. Goiter was very prominent, especially in the Alps, Central Europe, Germany, etc. Today, many doctors think that taking iodine causes a goiter. And so you can see what's happened in medicine. We've gone from this, looking at something this way, and now we're doing it this way. And, the problem is that, and this again points out the picture, if you forget your history, you'll trend to do what? Repeat it, okay? So we're heading in that direction again now. Now, iodine belongs to a family. They're called the halogens. And the halogens have the ability to go from a solid structure to a gas without ever becoming a liquid. And so you can see the halogens here, and these all have the ability to go from a crystal into a gas, and you never see them turn into a liquid unless you mix it with something else. Worldwide, iodine is a source of goiter. It's a problem of enlargement of the thyroid gland. The other problem that we've seen is that worldwide, the number one source of mental retardation in the world is iodine deficiency, okay? Number two, we have now learned that this mental retardation can go anywhere from attention deficit disorder, which we are now seeing an epidemic of among our Adventist teenage children and our children in the high schools and so on, and even into the colleges and graduate schools. We're seeing ADHD, and it's all part of the spectrum of the severe mental retardation. And you go from an IQ of 70 to 90 to maybe 110 to an IQ of 50, and that's this guy right here. He's a cretin. And cretins are babies that are created in the uterus of the mother, and the baby never got any iodine through the pregnancy. And so as a result, this guy has an IQ of about 50. He is, because of the mental retardation of the brain, the skeleton is also retarded. And so you will see skeletal growth retardation because of the retardation inside the brain up here. And so when he talks to you, he can't even talk. He's got an IQ of 50, and his speech to you is, that's his speech. And so when I go to Ecuador, you'll see lots of these people in the village markets and so on, and throughout the Andes Mountains in Bolivia, Chile, you'll see these people, and they basically, when they come up to communicate with you, it's all just touching and pushing, but they can't talk. And so, but there's thousands of these people up and down the mountains of the Andes Mountains. Now, we looked at the issue of goiter, and that is basically what ended up happening is that there was an epidemic of goiters up in the Great Lakes region. We're talking Detroit, Akron, Ohio. We're talking Buffalo. We're talking all the Detroit, Chicago, all that area, a lot of goiter. We have something like, back in the 1924, something like 56% of all the people that lived in the Great Lakes region had goiters, okay? And if many of you come from that area, you recognize the fact that there were goiters in your own families back in that time. And what's interesting is that with the development of goiter, we also were doing statistical analysis of the population, and we found that there were cancers that were showing up in relationship to goiter. And so what we found is that when a person has a goiter, they're at higher risk for development of thyroid cancer. That when there's goiter, there's a higher risk of breast cancer. That when there's goiter, there's a higher risk for stomach cancers, cancers of the esophagus, cancers of the ovary, cancers of the lining of the uterus. So these cancers definitely showed up in the presence of goiter. And so at that point, we sat there and said, aha, iodine must have something to do with cancer. And so, there have been tremendous studies that have now been done just on this particular topic. 1990s, goiters was prevalent in the Great Lakes region. 40% of school-age children had goiters. In 1924 in Akron, Ohio, 56% of the population had a goiter. And then when they looked at school-age children, the ratio of goiter was 1-to-1, one boy, one girl. As soon as the women went through puberty and they started making estrogen, estrogen inhibits the ability of the body to absorb iodine. With that decreased absorption, what you'll find is that goiter among women is like 6 women to every 1 male who has a goiter. So goiter is more common in women than it is men. And why is it? Because you guys make estrogen. We make a little bit, but women make a lot more, and the estrogen inhibits your ability to absorb iodine. That's a key point. Look at the disease called hypothyroidism, low thyroid disease. 15 women to every 1 man who's got this illness. And it's all because of the estrogen decreasing your ability to absorb iodine. Every cell in the body contains and utilizes iodine. White blood cells cannot effectively guard against infection without adequate amounts of iodine. Iodine is concentrated in the glandular systems of the body. Thyroid gland contains the largest amount of iodine, but there are other tissues that contain iodine. These include the breast, the salivary glands, the parotid glands, pancreas, the brain tissue, the cerebrospinal fluid, the stomach, the skin, the lacrimal glands. And the absence of iodine in these tissues is a promoter of cancer. If you don't have enough iodine in these tissues, you will head right smack into the jaws of cancer. Why do I talk to Adventists about this? A good number of you are vegetarian. 80% of all vegetarians are iodine deficient. Because, number one, you don't eat fish. Number two, we never taught you how to become marine vegetarians. We never taught you how to eat or how to cook with seaweed. Okay? And the Japanese, who have the highest concentrations of iodine, eat seaweed 2 or 3 times a day. They eat seaweed for breakfast, for lunch, for supper, and so on. So you can understand that we're not even coming close to the amount of seaweed that we need to eat. But iodine helps these glands to perform better and to perform. If you don't have enough iodine, you have problems with decreased ability to make saliva. If you don't have iodine in the skin, you can't sweat. Many of you, when you get hot, like this past summer, you've been getting hot, but many of you can't sweat. And when you can't sweat, it's because you don't have enough iodine in your body. Now, to give you an illustration, I have a patient who, she was a pharmacist down in Puerto Rico, and this lady went to her son, who's a pharmacist, and one day she said, "Son," she was 70 years old, and she told her son, she said, "I can't sweat." And what was her son's response? "You don't need to sweat, because when you sweat, you get stinky, and you don't want to smell." And so she basically sat there and said, "You know what? Something's wrong with your brain." She said, "We live in Puerto Rico where it's 90 degrees temperature. We live in Puerto Rico where it's 100% humidity." She said, "You're supposed to sweat." She said, "I don't sweat anymore. What is wrong?" And he said, "You don't need to sweat because you don't need to stink." You see his thinking? And that's the way doctors in today's world think, okay? So what ended up happening is for the next 5 years on her birthday, she would always come to her son and say, "Why can't I sweat? Why have I lost my ability to sweat?" He said, "You don't want to be stinky." So finally, she came to him 5 years after the initial event, and she sat there and said, "I'm not going to ask you the question anymore." And he said, "Why not?" She said, "Because I'm going to die. I've got breast cancer." Okay? Iodine helps breast tissue to behave normally. Without iodine, your breast tissue goes wild, and you get into problems with breast cancer. And in her case, she came down with breast cancer, and 6 months later, she was dead. And I went to a medical conference in Los Angeles. I was speaking to 1,000 cancer patients there. And I said this story, and I said, "How many of you have lost the ability to sweat?" 1/4 of the people in that conference who had had cancer stood up and said, "We don't sweat anymore." So don't think this is a benign statement. This is very real as far as what's going on out there. And again, it's the absence of iodine that causes these glands to malfunction. And when they malfunction, you head right smack into the jaws of cancer. There's 2 types of iodine. One is iodine and the element, and then there's the salt of iodine called iodide. And certain tissues have preferences for one or the other, such as the breast loves both iodine and iodide, but the thyroid prefers iodide, the salt. The human prostate loves iodine. The salivary glands, your ability to make saliva, is iodide controlled. The stomach likes iodine. The skin prefers iodide. So we've gotten down to the point where we can differentiate which type of iodine these tissues work best with. This is probably the most important statement to this church and to all the churches in this area, and that is that iodine is essential for normal growth and development of children. It is crucial for normal central nervous system development and IQ in children in the first 3 years of existence. From the time that a baby is created in the womb until 2 years after birth, the baby's IQ is developing. And by age 2, the baby's IQ is set in concrete. Deficiencies can result in cretinism. You saw what a cretin looks like. These people are mentally deficient, and they're deaf. They have physical and intellectual development problems. Mild deficiency in early fetal life manifests as attention deficit disorder. ADD is not associated with thyroxine levels at the time of birth. That is, ADD is not associated with the level of thyroid hormone that's present at the time that a baby is born. IQ is totally developed because of the presence of iodine. Having said that, this is looking at the reverse. Lack of iodine gives you mental retardation. What happens if you give mothers who are pregnant iodine during their pregnancy? And that group is called the Japanese. Here in the United States, the intake of iodine is like maybe 150 micrograms of iodine per day. In Japan, because of eating lots of seaweed, eating lots of fish, we look at iodine there and their IQs. The Japanese have some of the highest IQs in the world, and we even see that in first generation Japanese children here in the United States have the highest IQs in this nation, and that's because iodine will, if you give a mother who's pregnant iodine, she will develop a baby who's a genius. Did you hear me? We get geniuses. And so, to give you an illustration, one of my patients, actually this is a lady I met at a medical conference, and she was Lebanese, and her father was a Lebanese doctor, and he insisted on all his children taking iodine throughout life. Take a few drops of iodine every day, okay? When she got pregnant, she said, "Do I need to continue taking the iodine?" He said, "Yes." And so she took iodine throughout the whole pregnancy. The baby, she said, was very hyperactive, very mentally alert. When the baby got into school, he always made A's. He made A's throughout elementary school, high school, college, and medical school. And in medical school, he was number 1 in his class. When he graduated from medical school, he went into the School of Theology. He loved languages. He today is 49 years old and speaks 13 languages. He works with the special forces for the United States government. He is board certified in the field of medicine in 5 fields of medicine. I told his mother, I said, "Have you told your son it's time to stop learning and go to work?" And she said, "Well, he is." She said, "He's teaching at a medical school, and she said, not only that, he sings opera. And she said, he doesn't need to have the book in front of him. He sings the song 2 or 3 times, and he knows it by heart by the 3rd time. All these opera, and he speaks ancient languages. He speaks Arabic, Hebrew, etc. So, I mean, this is the type of person. And she said, "I've always wondered why my son was as smart as he was." And she said, "He's this way because I took iodine throughout my whole pregnancy." Okay? Folks, I've been giving iodine to a lot of women who get pregnant. Women, teenage girls who are getting pregnant, we give them iodine throughout the pregnancy. I can tell you right now, we've got like 46 geniuses in my practice right now. And I can predict, based upon the behavior of these kids, I can predict what their behaviors will be like as they continue to age. My oldest one right now in the practice, she's 15 years old. She started taking college courses at age in the 5th grade, and she's been making straight A's in high school. She's made straight A's in all of the college courses she's taken. And she finally looked at her mother this past summer and she said, why am I rushing through life becoming so, taking all these classes? She said, I really need to slow down and just enjoy my teenage years, because she said, at the rate I'm going, I'll be in college by the time I'm 16, and she said, what am I rushing into it for? She said, learning is fun, but there's other things to life, and she said, I need to learn to enjoy the other things. Okay? Do you see what happened? So that's her at age 15. And so we basically, but we've got 44 of these kids in the practice right now, and they're all geniuses. These are children who by the time they're 3 years old will take 5 puzzles, each puzzle with 50 pieces. They'll take all 5 puzzles, dump them in a pile, put out the little things for the puzzle, and they'll work on all 5 puzzles at one time. Okay? That's the type of brain these kids have by the time they're 3 years old. Yes? How are they? They're full of common sense. They're not, they play with other children. They love to play with dolls. They love to play everything. But when it comes to competition and the school systems, don't try, because you'll get beat hands down. These kids, you just show it to them once, and they've got it. Okay? And that's part of the key. I mean, one of my doctors in the practice, he gave the iodine to his daughter during her pregnancy, and the baby at 1.5 years old, was doing 5 and 6 word sentences, had a vocabulary of over 2,000 words, and was sitting there having an intelligent conversation with her pediatrician. And the pediatrician looked at his mother and said, I'm not supposed to be able to talk to a child this old, 1.5 years old. Usually it's a 1 or 2 word sentence out of these kids. But he said, this child is sitting here talking to me. I ask a question, the baby understands and is responding back appropriately. He said, and this baby is paying attention to what I'm saying. He said, they're not supposed to be able to do that. So, and I said, this is what's going on. Yes, sir.
This has been really helpful to me, because when I do certain things, my wife has said to me that I must have been iodine deficient, and now I understand.
Yeah. So attention deficit disorder for iodine deficiency. Yes, sir.
If this has been known for so long, why are we just now hearing it?
Because nobody's paid attention to the fact of what iodine is doing. Notice we pay attention to the negatives in life, but we don't pay attention to the positives. Okay? So in this particular case, nobody's paying attention to what's happening. There's a worldwide conspiracy about iodine. In Britain, my wife and I visited Britain just a few years ago, and we found out that in Britain they took all the iodine out of the salt. Britain today is among the top 10 nations in the world with the least amount of iodine in their salt. They virtually have zero. Britain today is among the top 10 nations in the world for iodine deficiency. And you can imagine they are just now starting to see the cretins creeping out of the woodwork. And so they are finding out that somebody made a serious mistake 5-6 years ago, and the British healthcare system is now stuck with thousands of children coming out who are mentally retarded. Okay? So every year in the United States, We do a urine spot test, and we look at what's called the NHANES studies. And back in 71 through 74, we found out that the average intake of iodine was 320 microgram per day. For pregnancy, you only need for normal people, 150 microgram. For pregnancy, you need close to 320, and that was fine. But look at this, just about 12 years later, look at the intake of iodine has been dropped in half. We used to put iodine in our bread, and we took the iodine out of the bread and we started putting bromide. It's called brominated flour. And the bromide turns out to compete with iodine, and it keeps the body from absorbing iodine. By the time we get to 2001, here's the intake of iodine. I used to have a laboratory for testing for iodine, and these are the numbers that we came up with on just in 2004 to 6. What's interesting is how many people were very, very, very low in the intake of iodine. And it turns out that that number was about 16.5% of the people in the population were extremely low in the intake of iodine. Some of them are you guys. Why? Because you're a bunch of granola people who eat sea salt with no added iodine, okay? Or you eat iodide. And the other problem that we found is we asked the question, why is this going on? It turns out that, and here's the thinking of doctors. We sit there and say, there's an iodine epidemic. There must be something with the salt. And the doctors would sit there and say, but there's plenty of iodine in the salt. There should be no problem with iodine in this nation. Do you know what the problem is? 50% of all American women are cooking with salt that contains no iodine. Yes, there's plenty of iodine in the salt when the iodine is there, but 50% of you guys are cooking with no iodine in the salt. When we first started putting iodine in the salt back in 1928, if you go back and look at the advertising literature from back then, they had a skull and crossbones on all boxes of salt that contained iodine. They made it look like you were eating something that was poisonous. Okay? That's the thinking of what's going on in medicine. And so you can see here from 1971 through the year 2000, the NHANES study showed that the iodine levels in this nation dropped 50%. And it all had to do with the fact that we took the iodine out of the bread. It's a very simple, answer to that. During this time period, there was an increase in thyroid illness, cancers of the breast, the prostate, the endometrium, and the ovaries. All of the above conditions are associated with goiter, which is seen with iodine deficiency. Iodine binds to receptors throughout the body. If there is sufficient iodine present, iodine will be excreted. If the iodine deficiency is present, iodine will be bound to many tissues in the body and will not be excreted. That is, if you don't have enough iodine, when you take iodine, the iodine will stick. If you're loaded with iodine and you take iodine, then your body will excrete most of that iodine. And this is a test. Many of you picked up a card back there from Hakala Laboratories, and they make iodine pills, but they also do iodine testing. And you can be tested with these folks. You don't need a prescription for it, and you can be tested by them to see if you're making enough iodine for your body, or if you're getting enough iodine in your system. What we do is we give patients 50 milligrams of iodine. We do a 24-hour urine collection, and then we see how much was excreted. We have found that when the body has got plenty of iodine, you will excrete greater than 90% of the iodine that you put into the system. If you're at less than that, then you definitely got problems. 98% of the patients tested here in America were found to be low in iodine. After 2,500 patients from a nationwide pool that was tested in 2004, what we found is that iodine deficiency is about 15% of the population has got severe, and underline the word severe, iodine deficiency. Now, if you look at this very closely, we looked at where is the problem of iodine deficiency in this nation. Again, we called it the Great Lakes region. All around the Great Lakes, there was a lot of goiter, but you'll notice that there's a lot of goiter problems out in the west, the northern states, and through the mountainous regions. In California, there's a problem with a lot of iodine deficiency. Here in the south, not as much, but look where you're at in Tennessee. Okay? So you definitely have a problem with iodine deficiency in this area. Now, basically, we are getting about 150 micrograms of iodine per day, but look at the amount of iodine just to maintain that's necessary by different tissues. The thyroid needs about 6 milligrams of iodine just to stay healthy. The breast tissue need about 5 milligrams of iodine per day to stay healthy. Larger women with bigger breasts have a greater need for iodine. Men who have smaller breasts need lower iodine intake. Other tissues in the body need about 2 milligrams. How much iodine would you need? You need about what the Japanese are taking, which is about 13.8. You need about 12.5 milligrams of iodine every day, every one of you in this room. Period. Okay? 12.5 milligrams every day, every one of you right here. Just because of the needs of the tissues that are inside your body. Now, when the RDA was developed many years ago, the RDA was developed to try to keep people from getting a goiter. The RDA was not trying to keep people healthy with iodine. It was just to keep people from getting goiter. And to keep goiter down is 150 microgram per day. Look at the numbers. And in fact, during pregnancy, you need about 220 microgram. There was an article published in the New England Journal of Medicine about 7 or 8 years ago, showing that over 50% of all prenatal vitamins contain no iodine whatsoever. Talk to me about conspiracies in this nation. Somebody is playing with the iodine in this nation, and we're generating a bunch of, people with decreased IQs. Okay? If you don't believe me, start looking around. You'll see them. So the RDA was built to prevent goiter. There was no real concerns about the rest of the body's need because we only concentrated on the thyroid. Okay? And the other problem that had to be addressed was this problem with iodine did not address the increased exposure of other goitrogens, that is, chemicals that are known to induce goiters, and these include other halogens that are in the environment. That includes bromide, chloride, fluoride. So what are you doing to your water? What's happening with the water systems of the cities of this nation? We're adding fluoride, right? What's happening to the bromide? We put bromide into our flour, and so we have brominated flour. But there's even something more insidious that's going on, and we're adding bromide to the soda drinks. And, and my son got caught in this one. My son, we were using him as a guinea pig early on in the studies. And we would give him this large amount of iodine, 50 milligrams, and he would come back to me with a container with his urine in it, and about half of it was yellow, but the other half was a deep brown chocolate. And I sat there and I said, what in the world is this deep brown chocolate stuff inside your urine? And so we had Dr. Abraham take a look at it. He said, So he would take samples from the clear urine versus the chocolate stuff. And he said, your son is loaded with bromide. So I looked at his diet at home. There was, we hardly put any bromide in our diet. So my son loves to eat at Taco Bell. So I took him down to Taco Bell and I said, which one of these foods do you eat? And he pointed them out, and we checked the ingredients. None of them had that much bromide. I said, what do you drink? He said, I drink 3 of these big containers of Mountain Dew. Okay? Now, the bromide level, normal bromide level, should be less than 5 milligrams in a 24-hour period. My son was, when we did the study on him, he spilled out 600 milligrams of bromide in a 24-hour period. And so I said, I think you're getting too much of this Mountain Dew stuff. You need to cut it out. We looked on the side of the bottle of Mountain Dew, and it says brominated vegetable oil. That is where the bromide is coming in, okay? And not only that, they're putting bromide in many soft drinks. Even Gatorade, the citrus-flavored Gatorade, has bromide in it. And as you study bromide, you're going to find out that bromide can make you psychotic, can turn you crazy, can make you paranoid, can give you bad breath problems, stomach problems. Bromide poisons the testicles. We've got a problem nationwide where the amount of sperm that men are making is going down, down, down. And now we know that it's because the testicles are being poisoned by the amount of bromide in the soft drinks. So I went down I said, where did you learn how to drink Mountain Dew? He said, we do that at the high school. So I went down to the high school, to the commons area in the high school, and it's a good place to visit, folks. I went down there, and they had 12 vending machines. And of the 12 vending machines, they had 2 that were dispensing water, milk, other soda products. 10 of those machines were dispensing nothing but Mountain Dew. And I talked to the principal and I said, how often do you have to fill the refills of the Mountain Dew vending machines? So he said, we refill those 6 times a day. He said, that's how much Mountain Dew is being drank by these children. I looked on national statistics. I found out that between Nashville, Tennessee, and Asheville, North Carolina, just in this corridor right here, the average male aged 9 through 15 is drinking 5 Mountain Dew bottles a day. Does that tell you something? Okay? And bromide gives you problems with bad breath, gives you problems with intestinal pain, gives you problems with cardiac arrhythmias, can make you psychotic. Haven't you wondered how come we all of a sudden have kids who are becoming so paranoid they're going around shooting their fellow, students at school or shooting their teachers and so on, they're becoming paranoid. And the paranoia that's developing among our school kids is because of the high bromide intake that they're taking. And I've seen it. I've had to literally rehab teenagers who are stuck on Mountain Dew who are becoming paranoid and schizophrenic. And as soon as we take them off the bromide and clean them up, all of a sudden that schizophrenia problem disappears. So it's to let you know this is affecting our society. I have no idea. I think probably a lot of that comes out of watching all this weird TV stuff that's on the TVs right now. But, the other thing that we found, I'm sorry? Yes, it could be a contributing factor. We also found out that iodine is crucial towards normal breast function, that iodine helps to have the breast start behaving normally. Lack of iodine, you get problems with increased fibrocystic breast disease and changes consistent with early cancer in the breast. This is a problem where the breast tissue starts to behave abnormal. A lot of women have very painful breasts just before their menstrual cycles, and the women who have this problem, a good percentage of them, by the time they're 55 years old and above, will develop breast cancer. Most women don't get their breast cancer till age 65 and beyond. These women with fibrocystic disease, it's 55-year-old and beyond. And it's because lack of iodine gives you weird breast tissue. And it can give you increased fibrosis, increased scar tissue on the breast. What you will see is problems with increased cysts, increased scar tissue, abnormal looking tissue that looks very close to that of cancer. And this is all due to iodine deficiency of the breast. And so breast tissue is very sensitive to the lack of iodine. We looked at this and what we found is that the total body holds 1,500 milligrams of iodine, total body. 2% of all the iodine in the body sits inside the thyroid. The skin holds 20% of all the iodine in the body. You need iodine to help you sweat. 32% of all the iodine sits inside your muscles. Lack of iodine, you get increased muscle aches and pains. Many of you have heard of it. It's called fibromyalgia. Okay? And in fact, when you start taking iodine, a lot of muscle aches and pains disappear. 35% of all the iodine sits in the fat tissues of the body. And you need, and so iodine helps to regulate fat metabolism, but it keeps the fat tissues from becoming fibrous. So what we have here is the average thyroid holds 9 milligrams. It can hold up to 50. 20% is in the skin. And there are other tissues that have the ability to hang on to iodine. Number one is tyrosine. That's tyrosine. You hook two tyrosine molecules together. That's how you make thyroid hormone. But look at this, histidine. What is the problem with histidine? It's the precursor for histamine. Have you noticed that there's increasing problems with allergies in the population? We're becoming allergic to just about everything that walks in, okay? And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we've got so much of this molecule sitting around that is causing histamine reactions. Iodine binds to histidine and it keeps it from becoming biologically active. Iodine helps to stabilize our polyunsaturated fatty oils, and It helps to stabilize their membranes, and iodine helps to protect the body from the effects of too much oxygen in the body. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And in fact, here's an interesting fact. A lot of doctors right now think that if we give more than 1 milligram of iodine to a person, that's too much. And it has to deal with history. Iodine is what they call mucolytic. If you look at patients with asthma, patients with emphysema, chronic bronchitis, one of their problems is that the mucus that gets into the lungs comes out real thick. And the stuff is, they get mucus plugs. And it's very difficult to get these mucus plugs out. Iodine goes in there and destroys the mucus plugs. That's why iodine is what they call mucolytic. It lyses the mucus. And what happens is that iodine is used by the lungs and so on and so on. So for years, we in medicine, I mean, we're talking since the year 1900, for years we've been giving a product called SSKI, supersaturated potassium iodide. Notice, in today's world, if we give more than 1 milligram of iodine per day, people think that that's too much. You're going to get sick. It's going to make you hyperthyroid and so on. Folks, for years, almost 100 years, we have been giving SSKI 400 milligrams 4 times a day for people with asthma, emphysema, and so on. We've not seen any problems with hyperthyroidism. Okay? Does that tell you something? It tells us that we're not paying attention to history, and we're not paying attention to what we as medical doctors have been doing to the population. And the thing is that iodine helps to destroy these mucus plugs that develop there. During lactation, the breast is able to capture iodine and move the iodine into the breast milk so that the baby gets the iodine through the mother's milk. Iodine treatment of benign breast disease is accompanied by a reduced breast size and remission of the problems with the fibrocystic breast disease. Iodine induces apoptosis by formation of iodolactones or of arachidonic acid in both the thyroid and breast tissue. I just spoke to you Latin. Let me translate it to you in English. Apoptosis is natural cell death. Natural cell death. Iodine induces, first off, let me put it this way. Cancer cells think of themselves as being immortal. Iodine walks into a cancer cell and says, I am taking away your immortality. It's time for you to die. Period. That's on a regular basis. Iodine is doing that. Iodine induces apoptosis. So here you see it. Iodine induces apoptosis. It induces natural cell death by formation of iodolactones. And this is iodine attached to a 20 carbon fatty acid called arachidonic acid. And cancer cells are loaded with arachidonic acid. And iodolactones are the chemicals that literally tell it's the switch that tells the cancer cell it's time to die. But cancer cells have become resistant to this, and so they think of themselves as being immortal. Iodine takes away the immortality of cancer cells. Write this down. Iodine takes away the immortality of cancer cells. They took some rats and they gave them a chemical called DMBA to induce cancer in these cells. And what they found was that when they gave these cancer cells I mean, yeah, these cancer cells that develop from this chemical, that iodine was able to inhibit the development of cancer. Here is a word that you all need to watch for and look at carefully. It's Dr. Aceves. See it right there? She is a Mexican oncologist. She is a specialist in cancer. She works at the National Institutes of Health for Mexico, and she has been doing research on the topic of iodine in breast cancer or iodine in cancer. And this Dr. Aceves has pretty much proved that iodine takes away the immortality of cancer cells and helps to get rid of breast cancer, period. So, you know, this is probably one of the most significant statements that, you know, again, let me just put it this way. I used to be the Health and Temperance Secretary of the Fletcher Seventh-day Adventist Church, something similar to what you guys have here. We have 600 or 700 church members. We had, among that group, a lot of elderly women who were part of the church group. We had within that church close to 150 women who developed breast cancer. And they would all come up to me and say, "But Dr. Fletches, I don't eat eggs, I don't eat meat, I don't eat hamburgers, I don't eat, you know," and they tell me about all the things that they're not eating, which is basically the, quote, health reform diet. And then they sit there and say, "So because I'm eating like this, why have I come down with breast cancer?" You see what I'm saying? Many of them vegetarian, but now we know that 80% of vegetarians are iodine deficient. It's not what you're eating, it's what you're not eating. Does that make sense? It has everything to do with the fact that we haven't taught you guys how to eat with seaweed, like the Japanese. In fact, I would recommend that I saw that there's plenty of Asian women in this congregation. You need to have those girls teach you guys how to start making sushi type dishes, vegetarian sushi. Learn how to cook with seaweed, because seaweed will help you. And even Dr. Aceves here, some of her latest papers are sitting there saying, we need to give iodine with seaweed. I mean, she's flat out in that field right now. So that, you know, the thing is, we need to readjust our eating habits. And you've made the adjustment towards vegetarianism. Now we just need to take you one step further. Learn how to eat more seaweed, okay? Right? Kelp. Another word for it is kelp, and so on. But it's not just kelp, folks. You guys are behind the 8 ball. You've been this way for years, and so many of you are caught behind the 8 ball, and we need to pull you away from that by putting you on iodine while you're learning how to eat with seaweed. Does that make sense? There are subtle defects in thyroid function that are a feature of breast cancer. Breast cancer rates are higher in areas of endemic goiter in the United States. Where goiter is rarely seen throughout the world, breast cancer rates are very low. So the women in the world with the least amount of breast cancer are the Japanese women. Iceland, Chile, these places where they eat a lot of fish out of the ocean. Now, basically, you would think, you know, that the Japanese, we nuked them. We gave them 2 nuclear bombs. Their land is loaded with radiation, and yet they have the least amount of cancers in the world. Why? Because they're eating so much seaweed and fish out of the ocean. Luckily, nature knows how to take care of that, especially out in the ocean. But the oceans have, the oceans have a great way of detoxifying themselves. Whereas, and I'll tell you something, you look at these iodine pills that we are talking to you about, okay? These pills cost $50, $60 a bottle, whatever the cost is. When Fukushima, when the nuclear accident occurred at Fukushima, there was radiation all over the place. And the radiation was coming in a cloud over the United States. All of a sudden, everybody is rushing to go get iodine. These bottles of iodine right now that you can get from Hakala Research, they, within a period of 2 weeks, went from selling for $25 a bottle or whatever the cost to $1,000 a bottle. Number two, when the nuclear accident at Fukushima occurred, what did they pour all over the nuclear reactors? You saw them putting a white powder all over the nuclear reactors. What were they putting? Yes. Yeah, it was the health food stores that were charging over $1,000 a bottle. What is interesting is that when the nuclear accident at Fukushima occurred, they poured they were pouring boron over those reactors. Boron absorbs massive amounts of radiation, as well as iodine. So, the thing is that boron is very crucial towards helping to protect us from radiation as well as iodine. Let me just step back to yesterday's lecture. There was a young guy who was a mathematician. He went to visit China from Venice, Italy. And he came back and he noticed that the Chinese had taken their pottery, their clay pots, and they were putting a glaze over their clay pots. And they were heating them up because one of the problems of potters of old is that you make clay pots and maybe half your clay pots would be destroyed by the intense heat of the furnace. But the Chinese had invented a glaze that could be put all over these clay pots, and it stopped the pots from going into self-destruction under the intense heat. And that glaze contained boron. By the time Marco Polo came back to Venice, he discovered that in eastern Turkey, they had discovered this boron, and they were making the same type of glaze. And so a major trade developed between Venice and Turkey, and so on. Folks, have you not wondered why we are so protective of Turkey? Turkey provides 3/4 of all the boron in the world. Okay? 3/4 of all the boron is coming out of Turkey. Do you guys cook with boron? You know what it's called? Pyrex. Pyrex, the cooking ware, Pyrex is made with boron. And why? Because boron is a poor conductor of heat. So you can take a hot Pyrex pan and put it on a cold surface, it won't break. Okay? And these spaceships that we send up into space, they take all those spacecraft and they cover them with boron. Haven't you wondered how we can protect our astronauts up in space from the radiation from the sun and they not be damaged by it? It's boron. All those spacecrafts are covered with a thin layer of boron on the outside. the boron absorbs massive amounts of radiation. And boron does the same thing to you. It helps to not only give you strong bones, it helps to inhibit arthritis development, and it keeps you from getting hurt by radiation. The rest of the nation is looking for iodine for radiation if there's too much radiation in the atmosphere, but you can also be taking boron, and boron helps to decrease the exposure to the radiation. Okay? So that was just a side note. You will notice that low iodine intakes lead to a hyperestrogenic state. Hypothyroidism is associated with an 80 to 90% free estrogen in the body, and hyperthyroidism is associated with 20% free estrogen. And what we're saying here is that iodine inhibits the ability of the body to make estrogen. If you don't have enough iodine, your body will make a lot more estrogen, and then that will push you towards cancer. Whereas if you have lots of iodine, you have less. If you have lots of iodine, you make less estrogen, and so on. Okay. So estrogen metabolism is being altered by the levels of iodine in the body, which explains why among the women of the earth, the Japanese women have some of the smallest breasts. And that's because of the high intake of iodine that they have in their diet. Now, basically, what we have discovered is that there are enzymes in different tissues that help us to absorb iodine. So you'll notice here in the thyroid, we have an enzyme to help us absorb iodine so that you can make thyroid hormone. But you also have iodine in the breast, and you use it, it's called lactoperoxidase, and iodine here is being attached to the milk so that a mother can give iodine in her milk to the baby. And you will notice here iodine is in myeloperoxidase, which is an enzyme found inside the bone marrow. And we have now discovered that iodine also gets absorbed inside the bone marrow. In fact, we now know that white blood cells have the ability to make thyroid hormone from the white blood cells. Thyroid hormone is not unique to the thyroid. It can be made from the white blood cells of the body and also the ovaries. I have had cases in my office where we've had women who have problems with hyperthyroidism, and it's not coming from the thyroid. It's ovaries that are overactive and giving the woman too much thyroid hormone. So, and again, it has to deal with this issue of the enzymes that are in the body that helps iodine to attach to the proteins that are found in those tissues. So if you look at thyroid hormone, thyroid T3 helps you to burn calories, helps you to stay warm, helps you to make tissues, helps you to burn fat, and so on. So you need iodine to be able to make thyroid hormone. Now look at the incidence of breast cancer in the United States. The United States has some of the highest rates of breast cancer in the world. Look at the Japanese, they have the lowest rates. Life expectancy in the United States, the average person lives to be 77 years old. In Japan, 81 years old. Infant mortality rates in the United States is 7 infants per 1,000, and in Japan, 3.5 infants. Now, folks, what I want you to notice right here is, what is the average age of a person in North America for a male? How old will you be before you die? 77 years old. Okay? How old do doctors be before they die? 62. The average doctor lives to be 62 years old before he dies. But the average, and based upon the information we have from the Fletcher Park Inn, which is a big conglomerate of retired Adventist people, the average person, the average male at Fletcher Park Inn lives to be 87 years old, and the women live to be 95 years old. So this vegetarian lifestyle that you guys are developing will, at the end, extend your lives. But what good is it going to extend your lives if you are not mentally with it? Right? So we want to make you as mentally with it as possible, and we want you to be as much understanding as to what's going on. And part of it is that we can extend your life and give you good quality of life by giving you the right trace minerals that your body needs. Now, I want you to look at this. This is what happens to a tumor that does not have any iodine receptors in it. This is the tumor over a 10-day period. We put it in at this size. 10 days later, this is the size. Now we genetically modify the tumor so that the tumor can absorb iodine. And by genetic modification of the tumor, look what happens. We start out at the same size. 10 days later, look what happens. This should impress you with the fact that if we can get iodine into a tumor, we can kill it. Iodine takes away the immortality of cancer cells. And we've been able to do this with with the studies that have now been done. There are many different types of iodine. There is potassium iodide, SSKI, Lugol solution, iodoral, and betadine, etc. And we use iodine in all sorts of fields of medicine. But you need to understand that the iodine that we have been recommending to the patients is a combination of iodine and iodide. That combination does the best as far as keeping you guys healthy and keeping you out of trouble. And this is pretty much showing us that there are other tissues that absorb iodine. Here is a map of giving somebody some radioactive iodine. And you'll notice that after, this is at 30 minutes, look at the radioactive iodine throughout the body. At 6 hours, you'll notice where the radioactive iodine has accumulated. And at 20 hours, you can see that it's around the thyroid, the sinus structures, the pancreas and intestine and the bladder, and so on. So basically, we know the dynamics of iodine and what happens here. I'm afraid that in the medical field, we have all concentrated on iodine inside the thyroid, and we just forgot that iodine it's used by the whole body. This is holistic medicine. This is not just thyroid medicine, okay? We treat the whole body. We don't treat just certain tissues. Now we know that iodine is absorbed by the stomach, the breast, the salivary glands, the ovaries, the thymus, the epidermis, that would be your skin, the choroid plexus of the brain, the joints, the arterial system of the body, and the skeletal systems. So iodine works in just about the whole skeleton. This is not, when we talk about iodine, we are not talking about just the thyroid. We're talking about the whole body. This is whole body medicine. Now what's interesting is that there are hormones that help you to stimulate you to absorb iodine. They include oxytocin. That's the hormone that is released in women so that they can have a baby. But you know what? Oxytocin is released by men. The brain of a man is releasing oxytocin every 20 minutes. And we've been sitting there wondering, what in the world is oxytocin doing in men? And now we know that part of it is it's involved in iodine metabolism. Prolactin. We've always wondered why prolactin. Prolactin is the hormone that helps you to have milk in the breast, and men make prolactin. And now we know that prolactin is used for the absorption of iodine. Look at this. An inhibitor of the NIS system, the system for the absorption of iodine, an inhibitor of this is estrogen. So estrogen inhibits the ability of the body to absorb iodine, which explains why you look at hypothyroidism, low thyroid disease, 15 women to every 1 man. Hypothyroidism is more common in women than it is in men. Now, there is a system called the sodium iodide symporter, the NIS system. And this system gets poisoned. This system right here gets poisoned when you take bromide. That's why bromide in Mountain Dew, bromide in bread, bromide in anything poisons the ability of the body to absorb iodine. And so we have here bromism causes oxidative damage to the iodine transport systems and can result in an increase. When you give iodine, you can increase the amount of bromide that comes out in the body. That's why with my son, I gave him 50 milligrams of iodine, and he urinated back out 600 milligrams of bromide, because iodine will push the body to get rid of the bromide. And so I noticed with him that he would, if he urinated, and I would go look at his urine in the toilet, that at the very bottom of the urine there was a dark brown sludge, and so on. Today, I just looked at his urine a few months ago, and he's clean all the way through. So I told him, I said, you're doing a good job at staying away from Mountain Dew. But the thing is that this Mountain Dew problem is a very, very, very real problem. And you just have no idea how much damage this Mountain Dew is doing to the population.
Is it only Mountain Dew that has the bromide in it?
It's a good question. You need to become a reader of the ingredients of the soda, and you'll see it in the side. It says brominated vegetable oil. So you're going to find it in Gatorade, citrus-flavored Gatorade. Any type of citrus-flavored product, you look for the brominated vegetable oil in there. And they've been putting bromide in bread. So nowadays, there are companies that you'll see some of the bread-making companies that they sit there and say on the outer bag, it says this bread is made with non-brominated flour. Okay?
That was going to be my next question. Should we stop eating bread?
No.
Just buy the kind that...
What you need to do is be sure that when you buy flour, that it's not brominated, that when you eat bread, that they put on the label that there's no bromide in there. And a lot of the health food stores are now selling breads that contain no bromide. The health food industry is responding to this message that we've got, that we need to get rid of the bromide. Okay? That's correct. Now, in pregnancy, what we have found is that it's important that pregnant women get iodine, and we treat them as if they were a Japanese woman. In Japan, the intake of bromide, iodine, is about 13.8 milligrams a day. During pregnancy, we sit there and say, we can do no better than the Japanese. Let's take at least 12.5 milligram a day, okay? If we were to sit there and say, oh yes, take 50 milligrams or take 100 milligrams and produce a really, really, really super smart kid, the moment something goes wrong with that pregnancy, you're going to be blamed for it, okay? But you can point to Japan, you can point to Korea, and sit there and say there are millions of Koreans, millions of Japanese who are taking at least 12.5 milligrams of iodine a day. There's no increased incidence of death. And in fact, the major side effect of taking iodine during pregnancy is you have more pregnancies that make it to term. You have more children who are mentally intelligent, and they're very brilliant children. As it is right now, because of what we've been doing the last 20, 30, 40 years of our denomination, we have been pushing towards getting away from the iodine foods. And what's happened is we have got an epidemic of attention deficit disorder showing up among our kids. I bet you that you've probably seen that in the population here. And if you take care of the teenagers in this church, you'll see attention deficit disorder being a problem. And the problem is that, it's here. We need to know what to do for it. The answer to attention deficit disorder is the human IQ is set in concrete by age 2. I can increase the IQ and the brain function by using opal. Pharmaceutical grade opal. It's called silica. And through Hakala Research Labs, they make a pharmaceutical grade opal tablet. It's a silica tablet. It comes as 150 milligram per tablet, and you need anywhere from 1 to 5 pills per day. And you will find that your brain will be very, very mentally alert in the presence of opal. You were created out of opal, and opal is a stimulant to your brain. We have seen, I visit down to South America quite frequently, down in Ecuador. And while I've been down there, I had the privilege of getting to know one of the original researchers in the field of endocrinology and interfering into a village's life. And they took 2 villages side by side, both villages iodine deficient. And in one village, they gave iodine to the pregnant mothers. The other village, they didn't do it. And then they sat there and watched them for the next 15 years. At the end of 15 years, what they found is that all the babies that got exposed to iodine during pregnancy had IQs that were 15 points above the children in the next village who did not get iodine throughout the pregnancy. So they did that down in Ecuador, and we can benefit from that information. And now we can tell you that if you give iodine to a pregnant woman, and you give her the same amount of iodine as if she were, a Japanese woman,